so I think the dreaming, getting back to what do I dream about? What did I dream about? They're not frivolous. It's not pointless or foolish to dream. It's actually foundational to dream, because I think these dreams, these desires are clues as to the way we're wired.
Hey guys, it's Mindi Linscombe, your host of the Something New Show, and we are so excited to be here in the studio again after the new year to learn how to live a life worth celebrating. And today I have a very good friend in the studio, Graham Cochrane, all the way from Tampa, Florida, and he and his wife and family and kids are here because we just spent the last few days with our kids all together doing some vision planning for each of our families for the new year to make sure that we make it very intentional. Right? I mean,
Yes.
I'm super, we could do a whole episode about that, and maybe we will one day. But we basically have been spending time praying and also asking our kids, like, hey, what is God speaking to you about this year? What does it look like to be intentional with our time and our resources? And it wrapped up really well today with the calendar sesh.
Yes.
But it's been a blast, and I've just so enjoyed getting to know your kids because your wife, Shay, and I have become good friends, but this trip has been really cool to see our kids get to know each other and, you know, play cards and talk about all the things. Shark Tank a lot.
Shark Tank, I was about to say.
I was going to say,
We're not brainwashing our kids to be entrepreneurs at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
They chose that show.
They chose it. Well, I'm going to briefly tell our listeners about you because they might not be familiar. And if they are, that's awesome. But Graham, you are our 7-figure entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and online business coach. In fact, that's some of my favorite conversations with you have been, you know, just discussing business coaching because it's something we both do for a living, and how do we bring the most value to the people we serve, which is such a fun conversation. He founded the Recording Revolution in 2009, turning it into $1 million business, helping musicians produce professional quality music from home. So I love that you have that musical background in addition to all the business stuff. But in 2018, he launched GrahamCochrane.com to help individuals start and grow knowledge-based businesses. It's now a multi-7-figure enterprise. Host of the globally ranked Graham Cochrane Show podcast, he guided by his signature Rebel framework that we're going to talk about today that empowers people to find clarity and confidence. I cannot wait to get into that. Also, I want to just mention that you and Shay have a great podcast called Family Goals. So if people have been listening to the Something New Show, I think you're going to love to hop over for some very like-minded content when it comes to raising kids in 2025, right?
Yes.
But let's talk about Rebel. I know that it's like something we could talk about music, we could talk about family, which we might. But I think the hot topic recently has been really this is impacting people's lives in all sorts of industries. And I would love to hear how it came about.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this book, and we're just celebrated hitting the USA Today bestseller list, which was awesome, and the book's resonating with people. Thank you.
That's awesome.
And it's cool because really it's a book about identity and purpose, and giving people permission and maybe tools to figure out, how do I know who I am and why am I here, and permission to be myself, or maybe even do things my own way. So in the entrepreneur space, it's like, can I run my business the way I want to run my business, even though I don't see anybody doing it that way? Or parenting, like, can our family be a little different? Like, so it's a beautiful book that applies to a lot of people, which is fun. But the idea came like in a weird, like, session with John Gordon of all people. We're in a group of Christian entrepreneurs together, you, me, and John, and a bunch of other people. And I had a day with John, and I was thinking I was going to get some coaching on how to do more public speaking. I mean, he's a world-class speaker on the biggest stages. I'm like, John, I want to be like you one day. So, like, what do I need to know? I had all these questions. I had like 27 questions planned, and convinced him to come over to Tampa. He lives in Jacksonville. And he came over to the office, and we're hanging out. And before we got into anything, he said, well, what's the message of your next book? Because I had just published my first book, which is really about the business model that I teach. How do you take what you know and monetize it on the internet? And I was like, John, I don't know. I just released my first book.
You're like, stop. Yeah. I just finished that project.
I know you have 1,000 books, but I got one. But I was so proud of the one. I was like, bro, I haven't even thought that far ahead. And he said, well, you really got to figure out the message of your next book before we talk about speaking. And so we spent like a couple hours like noodling on what I could talk about. Long story short, we weren't coming up with like the thing that I was excited to write about. And so he said, well, tell me your life story. And I started to tell him about, I was a lifelong musician and I wanted to be this rock star, and everyone told me to go to college. I didn't want to go to college. I was like, what's the point? I just want to be a musician. And then my rock star dream kind of died and I had to pivot. And then I started this business in the recession, and it was a blog and a YouTube channel. People were like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know, but I think there's something here. And he just interrupted me. He said, bro, you don't do what people tell you to do you? You're a rebel.
And I can totally hear him saying that.
Yeah, you're a rebel, Graham.
I can hear it.
I've tried to do my John Gordon impression. He's not really impressed. He's like, I don't sound like that. But in that moment, it was a weird, Mindi, it was like a word that I had never used for myself. But at the same time, in that moment, it was like a word that I felt fully actually described my story a little bit. It's almost like I had language of like, yeah, everyone was going down one path or told me to go down the path that they thought I should go down, or most people that grew up in my part of town did this and their parents did this. And I just never felt like me. And I wasn't ever trying to be rebellious, but I always wanted something different, always found myself doing something different. And I felt bad about that, or felt like I was doing something wrong, but it was almost like he gave me language of like, no, you chose the path that makes more sense for you. And so we started to reverse engineer my story.
You're like, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
It just happens to be so unique.
Yes. And so all of a sudden, I feel like within 48 hours, God gave me a framework to understand. I was trying to unpack, how could I teach what I've done intuitively? And he gave me this framework, and I pitched it to my publisher, and they're like, let's do it. When can you get the manuscript in? So it was kind of like this whirlwind of a 6-day period of time. And so I started writing this book, and I had no idea what it was going to become. Whereas my first book, I knew what I wanted to teach. I coached this stuff all the time. But this one was like me discovering how do you, it'd be like you writing a book that's not a memoir. The book isn't about me. But how do you write a book that's structured and applicable and actionable and short and punchy and universally relevant,
goes towards anyone. Yeah.
That also like reverse engineers the way I've reached success, in which I didn't realize I was doing anything smart. It just felt like I was groping in the dark and making the best out of what I had. But it's led me to my most successful moments have been when I've been uniquely operating in my identity. And so that's what the book's really about, is helping people get there.
I love that. And I love how someone can come into your life even for a moment, because I think a lot of us listeners might be like, okay, who do I need to seek out to have help from, or maybe a regular mentor or whatever. But it could be somebody just like John just spent a day with you, and it was like this awakening moment of one day. I mean, it's not like you guys talk every day, right? And it was just so powerful to be like, hey, let me pull it out of you and drag out a story that turned into a really incredible concept that, I mean, you're talking about it all over the country now. Like people are asking you to share and speak on big conferences and all sorts of industries. Like, things that you're like, I'm not an expert in real estate necessarily, but this applies to the way you do business.
Yes.
Which is...
Well, and that goes to the power of coaching and like what you do, which is you need someone outside of you to see something that's so close to you, or to connect a dot. Like, do you realize that this, and this really line up with the way you do this, and no one does it that way? And you're like, I didn't, what's ordinary to you is extraordinary to other people. And sometimes you need someone else to see that. And it could be a long-term coaching relationship, or it could be one single moment of like, hey, have you ever considered this? And you're like, oh my gosh, I should really press into that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, so when you think, I guess it kind of, you answered my question here, is like, what does the term rebel in the context of your book? What would you say there?
Yeah, because when I don't know what you think of when you think of the word rebel, but I think of the Star Wars references of the Rebel Alliance, like a bunch of ragtag people going to take down the Darth Vader and the big bad guys. I think of like James Dean, rebel without a cause. Like he's smoking a cigarette somewhere with a red leather jacket. Like the guy you don't want our daughters to date, So normally it has this negative context, but really when you look at it, it's someone who says like, hey, everyone's going one way, and I don't know if I like that. Is that really the way I want to go? So I think of it as a stream, and we're all in the stream of life, and if you do nothing in life, you're going somewhere. There is already a current of conformity, and that's really the enemy, because conformity, it takes you somewhere, and if you don't like where it's going, that's on you to kind of step out of the river or the stream, even if it's a slow-moving stream, and just analyze and ask yourself some questions. Is this where I want to go? So I think about it in the sort of 5-6 core areas of life, like your marriage. Is the way everyone's doing marriage in the culture at large, the microculture of my people in my church or that I do life with, or do I like the way their marriages are turning out? If I don't do anything different, I'm going to probably turn out like them, because we all conform by default.
Default.
It's the default. And so this is really a book about intentionality, and it's a book about being a rebel. To me, is someone who's saying, hey, I am designed a specific way. And here's my premise, is that we're frustrated in life for a lot of reasons, but largely the frustrations in our life come out of being out of alignment with our design. So we're operating out of alignment with the way God made us. You're wired a certain way. And regardless of your faith background, you're wired a certain way. And so you're going to be frustrated if you live a life outside of that. So it's really a book about permission to say, hey, maybe you were designed strategically on purpose a certain way. And not everyone's going to like it if you do something different, but that's the challenge of being a rebel and doing parenting differently, or money differently, or your business differently, or whatever it is some people are going to say, hey, I don't like that. But you look at most rebels in history, Martin Luther King Jr., like very rebellious in the sense that he wasn't doing what a lot of people wanted him to do. Like, keep quiet. Like, this is the way things are.
Yeah, be good with it.
Just be good with it. And he was like, I'm not good with it. So he wasn't being a rebel, like, I'm just going to be a jerk. He was like trying to fight for something that he felt was needed to be changed. And so now we look back at someone like him and say, wow, he's a hero. The Steve Jobs in the computer industry. Like, why do you got computers are this way, technology's this way? He's like, no, let's do it this way. Nobody liked it at first. Right? Jesus, the ultimate rebel, like, he wasn't the right religious person that the religious people wanted him to be. He just sort of did things differently. People didn't like him, but then now billions of people worship him. So the rebels don't get a lot of popularity in the moment, but then you see the wisdom of it later, that it was either the right fit for them. Like, you know what? I wouldn't have chosen that for me, but that was a good fit for you. Or maybe they change history.
And there's so much freedom, like a feeling of a weight lifted. At least I felt that even when I look back at my entrepreneurial journey of thinking, I'm supposed to do it this way, so I better do it this way.
Supposed to, yeah. Like, where does that come from?
Where does it come from? And one of my favorite counselors, she just always asks the question, who told you that?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's just a simple question. And so anything that I might say, well, I should probably, be really good at cooking, and she's like, well, who told you that?
Yeah.
Like, why do you have to be an amazing cook? I'm like, I don't know. Aren't I supposed to? And we have so many beliefs about our journey, whether it's a gender role thing in a marriage, or it's a way to parent, or it's a way to start your business, run your business, or even to do like something so simple like paid ads. I mean, there's so many people like, this is the only way to do paid ads. I'm like, there's so many really cool things that you can test out in that space of marketing. It's like your dollars can bring people in so many different ways. Oh, yeah. But I just, I feel like there was a moment similar to you. Is like, I just decided somewhere a long time ago that I'm like, I could just do it how it feels good to me.
Yeah.
And it just was such a release. I mean, so simple, Graham, but like, you're sitting in my bridal shop right now, and people in the industry years ago used to all just wear black. Like, every stylist in every bridal boutique everywhere.
Interesting.
And I remember having this moment of like, why do we all wear black? I was like, I don't want to wear black every day. Yeah. And I just felt so free to be like, I guess I can change it.
Yeah.
I don't like it, so I'll change it. So what I'm saying to your point is, I think that's why both are like, I so connect with your wife when it comes to the way we parent. Like, we have had so many great deep conversations around the parenting thing, and it's just so refreshing, because I feel like I hadn't met someone so deeply connected to some of the same values, because it just feels like we're doing it differently, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun to just be like, wow, like, let's see what happens, right? Because I do look at how kids are turning out in the other way, in the alternative, and there's some good fruit, but there's not enough for me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, but I want to go for 4 for 4.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not aiming for like 3 out of 4 turn out okay.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm just saying, like, I think this concept is so fascinating, because it really does take the weight off your shoulder when you feel free enough to say, hey, maybe I was made to do this differently. And this feels right. Because did you follow a feeling or an inclination? Like, what, and maybe that's the framework that we're going to get into. But I'm like, do you follow, like, how do you know, like, okay, this might be the road less traveled, and statistics say this is how you become a rock star. You go to A, B, and C. Right. But like, when you actually look at like the tipping point, let's just say that book, it's like so many really unique factors landed people into success.
Oh, yeah.
There wasn't an A plus B equals C route.
Yep.
So I'm just saying, like, maybe we go into the framework.
Yeah, I
because
think
I'm
that'll unpack it a bit.
it'll help.
Well, and I think because the beauty of what we're talking about is it's exhausting being someone that you're not. You know, like Soren Kierkegaard, he was a philosopher in, I think, the 19th century. His famous quote, the one that I love the most, is the most common form of despair is not being who you are. Like, it's just exhausting having to be someone, like someone your parents think you should be, or your friends, or even the person you used to want to be, or do the things that you thought you once wanted, if that changed. I mean, this is, we're talking about identity here. And so it's exhausting when you realize this isn't really who I am. It's actually so much easier to be who you are, but there's new costs to do that, because you'll get plenty of feedback, air quotes, feedback from people, even people that love you, especially people that love you because they just care about you, and the human brain and a lot of relationships are just wired to keep you safe. And so they just want to keep you safe. But safe, it's not really where thriving happens. Like, we don't know everyone's uniqueness, so we need to kind of have the courage to do some of this deep work, which is really what the book's about. It's like a coaching session in a book. I wanted to give people a very short, very easy read that's very actionable. And so the framework maybe might make it more sense, but REBEL is an acronym. And so the REBEL walks through the process I take people through, and really the process that I went through intuitively. But when I look back, I'm like, this is exactly what I did. So the R stands for resolve, and you're resolving to dream again. And this is the most important one, because I think we don't realize how important desire is. There's a beautiful passage in the Bible, Psalm 37, verse 4, that says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And while the one interpretation of that is like, if you love God and enjoy him and pursue the things he values, like he'll bless you with the things that you desire. But if you look at the word give in the Hebrew there, it can also mean to assign, like you gave your children their names, you assigned them their names, or you give them chores, like, hey, I'm assigning these chores to you. So you could literally read it in Hebrew as delight yourself in the Lord, and he will assign desires to your heart. So I think that the desires you have, like your desire to open up this boutique, your desire to coach bridal shop owners and help them explode their business and do things better, your desire to help families live intentionally, and like, not everyone has those desires, but you do, and they were put there by somebody. And so I think the dreaming, getting back to what do I dream about? What did I dream about? Big dreams, like career dreams, small dreams, like I've always wanted to eat at that restaurant or learn Spanish. Like all of these dreams, they're not frivolous. It's not pointless or foolish to dream. It's actually foundational to dream, because I think these dreams, these desires are clues as to the way we're wired. So when people say, well, I don't know who I am. Okay, well, start with desire. What do you dream about? What would you let yourself dream about? Dream of doing, being, or having. Those are three good categories, because they're going to give you data points to the way you're wired. It doesn't mean you have to do all those things or pursue all those things, but you will have intel on yourself when you see it. And so I walk people through a 50 dreams exercise in the book, and it's hard because you're like, oh my gosh, I don't, especially as adults. It's easy for kids. Like, yeah, there's a million things I want, but that gets beat out of us as adults, because you shouldn't want things. You should just get serious and be content. Especially if you have a faith background, it can really mess with you, because you can be told just be content. And I think we're pitting things against each other that aren't meant to be in conflict. But it starts with desire and putting a stake in the ground, saying, I'm gonna get curious about what I dream about now.
Well, and a question I've asked people when they don't know the answer to that, they're like, I don't even know what I desire. Like, it's been so long since I've thought about myself. You know, parents.
Oh yeah,
that
all
are
of
like,
us. So
that
hard.
are. I've talked to business owners. They're like, oh, Mindi, that's the hardest question, because I don't think about myself, what I want. And I'm like, okay. Another way I've framed it is when, let's just say you sit down and your brain goes to like, you're off work.
Yeah.
Where do your thoughts go to?
Yeah.
You know, it's just like the empty space.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about in the empty space? And I feel like that is the answer. That's what you're dreaming about.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of those dreams would come from that. I think there's other ones that are even more buried, though, because we've already convinced ourselves that it's either impossible or it's not appropriate. And there's some things that are clearly like not appropriate or helpful or destructive. So I'm not talking about those things, but most people are afraid. And I don't think you're one of those people. I know we're all fearful of things, But like few people are really bold. Like, I'm just going to do this anyway. Most of us are like, I want to do this thing. So I love this question that Tim Ferriss has. So I steal it. He says, if you were the smartest person in the world and you knew where it was impossible to fail, what would you dream of doing, being, or having? So it's like, you could pull it off and it were impossible to fail. Like, it removes the buts, or that's not very likely. But if we could remove that, crazy.
You're the smart. It's impossible to fail.
Yeah, you're the smartest person. You know everything. What would you want to do? And it's very raw, and it's very emotional. And I have people write it down. And as the first time I did this, it took me a week to come up with 50 things. I was like, I can't. Like 10 was like a big deal. Like 10, 10 things, 50. But it's almost in the process. I had a friend of mine that went through this. I took my whole church business leader group through the book. And he did the exercise, and he came up to me and said, hey man, I did that 50 dreams exercise. And he's like, I got to the very end, and one of my dreams was to have just a basketball goal, like hoop out in my driveway. I never had one as a kid. I always wanted it as a kid. And it sounds silly, but when I wrote that down, I'm like, I want a basketball hoop, just like I did when I was 10. He's like, I started to cry because I don't let myself even like pursue simple things like that. Like, oh, that was a kid thing. He's like, but it would just be fun to have a hoop and play basketball. It just unlocked something in him that he hadn't let himself get to. So it's really interesting to see what happens. But I think you have to start with desire, because we actually all desire different things. And until you get honest about that, you can be intentional all day long. But if you don't know who you are, what you value, then what's the point of being intentional about a life that's not? It's like, don't be like Mindi, don't be like Graham, be like you.
And that's never the goal. That's right. My dream is that when I meet people, if anything, I hope that I've inspired them or pulled something out of them to be more them.
Yeah. People need permission to do that. The two most important questions, the late Dan Miller said, brilliant author. He wrote a bunch of books, but 48 Days to the Work You Love is probably the most famous book he wrote. And he endorsed my first book, which was such a gift to me because he didn't know me from Adam.
Wow.
I think we lost him last year. I think it was 2023. Well, no, 2 years ago. But the two most important questions he says you need to answer in life are, who am I and why am I here? And I don't think most people know who they are. We know what roles we play. I'm Graham the entrepreneur. I'm Graham the husband, the father. I was Graham the musician for so many years. I still am, but that's how I identified who I was. But that was a part of who I am. It's not who I am. But getting honest with who you are is really, really hard. But once you know who you are, and then as we go through the book, you kind of see, we get to the very end, you understand your purpose in life and purposes, which is part of the punchline there, so much easier because it really stems from who you are.
That's awesome stuff. Okay, do you want to briefly highlight the EBL?
Yeah, I'll give you the
EBEL.
Yeah. So you dream again, and this is hard but fun work, and it's very 30,000 foot view. So some people are like, this isn't realistic. It doesn't have to be realistic, but you start there. E is then getting a little more clear, establishing the outcomes you want in life. So if you go from big picture dreaming, now we're looking at, I like to look at the next 3 years. So the most profound question I've ever been asked, one of my coaches, Rich Litvin, says, imagine it's been 3 years and we bump into each other and we haven't seen each other in 3 years. And I'm like, Mindi, I can't believe we haven't talked in 3 years, but remember we had the podcast together. It was the last time we talked. How the heck are you? And you tell me, Graham, this has been the best 3 years of my life. And I'm like, this is amazing. Tell me all about, what happened? What would you be telling me about? Like, what would have to be true for you to tell me it's been the best? It has been, past tense, the best 3 years of my life. And I feel like that question takes the dreaming down to bullet points. Like, this has happened with my kids. This happened in my marriage. This happened in my this happened in my health. Like, whatever comes up for you, that journal prompt can give you a lot of clarity on what you actually want. Because you're not looking too far out in the future, like 10 years. You're going to be totally different.
I do like
3 is a magical number. 1 year is like, it's hard to change your life in a year. You can do some. 10 years, you can do a lot of damage, but there's not a lot of motivation, and I'm going to be a totally different person in 10 years. 3 years, I can kind of forecast a little bit of where life is going to be with some certainty. So that's a magic thing. So we kind of go from dreaming to establishing outcomes, and then we get into some of the inner work. B is to break the negative thoughts, habits, and patterns, the things that are leading you to conformity. This is where I take you through a process I call the inner story audit. And it's just getting clear, like, what is the story you're telling, or the stories you're telling yourself? And it's fascinating because you can't hear the still small voice of intuition or the Holy Spirit or whatever you want to call it if you have these loud inner stories, these default stories. And we all have them, and they just change. But so we do some of that work. We break some of that before we then can engage, is the second E, engage in new rebellious thoughts and habits, because you change your thinking, which changes your actions, which changes your results. So we do some of the intentional work there in the second E. And then L is the hardest one for me, and that's letting go of outcomes and other people's opinions. So it's ironically, you establish outcomes at the beginning.
I was just going to say, so now you're going to be like,
you let them
release.
Go. Yeah, because you need a target, you need a bullseye to go towards, but then we can't control outcomes. You can't live based off of outcomes, but you need to be going in a direction that's meaningful to you, and then learn to be okay with whatever outcomes do come. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be a beautiful journey. And that's the hardest one for me, because as an entrepreneur, as a 3 on the Enneagram, I'm all about the outcome. I'm all about the destination. I struggle with the journey, and then letting go of other people's opinions along the way. This is an ongoing process, but this is where we do like a family values exercise in the book, or personal values, so that you can know, like, yeah, this is what I'm all about. Like, we did some of this stuff with our families this weekend, so we can say better yeses and better nos, because we have more clarity about, hey, these are all good things, but they're not what I'm all about in this season of life. And you need those like written down so you can make decisions better.
Running a successful bridal shop can be challenging, but with the right support, it can also be incredibly rewarding. Hi, I'm Mindi Linscombe, founder of Bridal Owner Success School, aka Boss. After 17 years in the bridal industry, I've developed proven strategies that drive both positivity and profitability in your business. Through Boss, you'll receive insightful coaching, time-tested frameworks, and a community of bridal shop owners dedicated to helping each other succeed. Ready to boost your profitability and find more energy in your business? Visit bridalownersuccess.com and sign up for Boss today. I see them as guardrails, really. When we talk about it as a family, we say, hey, we want to have some like foundational things that we're all about, what our values are, what we think are important, and how we want to spend our time. And those are simply guardrails. But then I do love to have a little bit of space to, be able to let those impromptu, spontaneous opportunities come available. Because sometimes I think, at least for me in my life, I've had a plan, and I think entrepreneurs have a plan, but then I've seen how like different twists and turns take place. And sometimes an even better plan came from just living in my values.
Yes.
But open to opportunities, and then not hesitating when they come about, because like I said, I let go of the maybe initial outcome, but I'm heading in the direction of the outcome. But I literally have seen so much of just me letting go of maybe it has to look exactly this way, and more saying it needs to be within the framework of the values that we have. We've had an even more amazing story.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And so it's just, it's interesting that that's your final step.
It's
I'm just saying, like,
yeah.
because I see it unfolding that way for us. I mean, we're 20 years into entrepreneurship, 20 years into marriage, 15 years into having kids, and we're looking at life going like, wow, it's amazing how we started just going in the right direction and then living with integrity and good choices, and has hardship come? Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Totally storms, right? But again, still heading towards the target. But we have had so many more blessings, and like I said, more of the freedom to say like yes to something that we never even dreamed of. Like I never would have dreamed that we were going to be at a mastermind in 2024 that introduced me to some great friends, or that the property we live on would become available. Like that would have never been on my vision board. Yeah. But it was just moving in the right direction, but then letting go of the like exact outcome that it had to look like.
I almost feel like there's 3 categories of people in the way you could live life, or 3 choices we could make. One is the default life, which is what I'm pitting as the enemy in the book. Like, hey, if we don't do anything, we're going to just conform and be like everybody else. And no shame. It's life's exhausting. It takes effort to do this work. There's a reason why people don't do it. The other extreme would be the one that's like, I'm going to be super intentional and I'm going to control everything in life. And that's a bit of a recipe for disaster, because it's very hard to control life, because newsflash, we can't control most of life. There's a lot of things we can, so I like the intentionality, but it can set you up for constantly being frustrated. And then there's this middle category that I'm almost thinking that you're describing and that I'm trying to embrace, which is like this intentional adventurer. Like, I'm going to intentionally set out and to try to go conquer this thing that's meaningful to me, but I'm going to view it as an adventure. And with an adventure, you never know what's going to happen. But that's part of what makes life exciting. And like, hey, maybe we should go look at this shiny thing over here because this looks interesting. Or we save these people over here, or we have this little battle. But the stories we get along the way are wonderful. But we are going somewhere. We're not just like Frodo sitting at home in the Shire, never going to leave the Shire. But we're also not like, hey, I'm going to go destroy the bad guy and it's going to go exactly like this. Like, there's no way to get, but you could try to convince yourself you can guarantee the outcome or the way it's going to happen. But there's a lot more freedom. I think Erwin McManus has this great line that people think freedom comes from, or people think peace comes from being in control, but peace really comes when you realize you don't need to be in control. And like, that's like I don't need to control it.
It's a release. It's
a release, because it's hard being God. It's hard being in control of everything.
I'm having a moment. I'm thinking about the hospital room when I literally was like, I'm reflecting back. I'm like, okay, I've brought my son to the best hospital. He has the best treatment plan, the best nurses. There's nothing else I can do. And I'm just saying, like, there's probably people listening and said, I've done everything I can. But that for me, I was, 33 years old or something. That was my moment, Graham, where I was like, I can't control anything. Like, I actually thought it was like a false sense of control that I think that I was living in, because I was always, okay, if I work this hard, it'll turn into this much. If I, do this workout, I'll eventually have this outcome, right? Most cases, there is a little bit of a cause and effect.
Yeah.
But there will come a point, if it hasn't hit someone already, but there comes a point in all of our lives where I think we realize I was never in control.
Yeah.
And that honestly was when I experienced ultimate peace.
Wow.
And I think that even if someone's in their lowest moment, it's an opportunity to honestly realize, like, okay, this lack of control is going to flush over me. The ultimate peace of realizing I don't have to be in control.
Yeah.
And I can do everything I can do.
Yeah.
But the end and outcome is not mine to control.
Well, thank you for sharing. That's powerful. And you know what comes up for me is, in a way, what about your most successful moments in life? How powerful would it be to realize that maybe it wasn't just because of everything I did, like I manufactured this outcome? What if we could also have the freedom of knowing sometimes you just get hooked up and the stars align, and like, like I wasn't in control of that great outcome either.
Wow.
And it's a humble place to be, but I also think that's more exciting of like, hey, I can't control these bad things that happen. It's not my fault that this bad thing or hard thing happened, but it's also not because I'm so great that this great thing happened either. And there's some freedom
important.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's actually really important because, especially I like to always reflect back and say, okay, if we had a good year, a good month or whatever, I'm like, that was for sure my team.
Yeah.
Like as a leader, you got to say, like, that's because of the people I linked arms with, but also teaching your team to say that's also because we had great marketing. Man, our marketing people really helped us this month. Or we had great customers.
Yeah.
Like we had great people that like flocked to us and we just connected,
Yeah.
and whatever coffee date led to that client exchange, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, there's so many factors that lead to success besides just like, I'm great,
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think that is a really humbling, big idea.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, if we have success, like, what did that come from? That also came from multiple
things lining up.
Touch points,
absolutely.
multiple touch points.
Yeah.
And not to be like, I'm so wonderful, I manufacture that, like you said.
Because that's actually a crushing weight to carry, to have to just be great. I'm so great. Yeah. Because what if the days you're not feeling so great, or it's not, and that's where you get an identity problem too. Like, I'm the person that's great. And that's a heavy burden. It's a heavy burden. So it's a lot more freeing to just get clear with who you are, what matters to you and your family or your career, or getting rid of all those shoulds. Like I've had a friend say, you should all over yourself. Like, I should do this, I should do that. Getting rid of those shoulds and saying, this is who I am. This is what matters to me and my family. but at the same time holding it really loosely of like, hey, let's go see what God's up to. Let's see what's in store. We can't control it, but we can also still be clear about what we value, what we want to pursue, and it helps us say yes and no. And there's a lot of peace that comes from that.
Circling back to when we first started this call, basically we were talking about how our families are doing this vision weekend. You're just bringing me back to the calendar moment today, because I could see, I'm on my phone looking at certain dates, you and Shay looking at dates. And what I loved is that both of us independently, we were putting down like our kids' birthdays, our kids, like cornerstone things, like what our family is doing, like you had your calendar and we had ours. And then we put in a few commitments that we felt like we were really needing to be a part of when it comes to work or whatever. And there was just so much space to still see like, what could God do with these open boxes and open pages? And we laughed. Shane and I laughed at the end. We're like, we know this feels really good in January, right? But it's going to fill up. However, I think that it was just a moment to say, okay, like we'll just put the cornerstone, most important things in here. But there was so much room for God to show up and do something and orchestrate something great. So I just think back to like,
That's
don't
cool.
control, create that space, see what the year holds.
I love that.
It's going to be a good year. If people wanted to stay in touch with you, Graham, and they wanted to hear more of all the good things you have to share, where would they find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram at the Graham Cochrane, hang out with me there. The Graham Cochrane Show drops on wherever you do podcasts or YouTube every week.
What's your personal podcast about?
Helping mostly online business owners create more money, margin, and meaning in their lives. So I find that people focus on money in the business space, but what they really want is all three. They want to grow their income, but they want more margin, which is flexibility, owning your time, and then meaning, purpose. They want a business that not that just they own, that's successful, but they love and they believe in and aligns with their values. So yeah, those are the three.
If somebody was like, I want to listen to the best episode tonight, what would you send them to? Like, what topic do you feel like is really hot for your listeners?
I'll tell you what, I just dropped an episode on the new year. It's a short one. It's one of my shortest ones, and it's about a gift, the gift I could give you in 2025 that will transform your life. I've had more feedback in the last few days from surprising people, like some of the biggest YouTubers reaching out privately and saying, like, this is rocking my world. And so I would watch that episode or listen to that episode.
The gift.
Yeah.
You can give them in 2025.
Yeah. It came out like the New Year week,
I love that.
I don't know when this is dropping, but yeah.
I love that. Well,
or it was New Year's Eve. It came out New Year's Eve. So there you go. That's the one.
That's awesome. Yep. And it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube and
or wherever you get your podcasts.
Wherever you came here. Okay. Very cool. And then, the show is about living a life worth celebrating.
Yeah.
So if you were to say, hey, this is one thing that I would just really feel like helps people live a life that's worthy of celebration, what would you say?
I mean, I think one of the greatest things that can unlock any door in your life and lead to things that are worth celebrating is humility. I think humility is the key that unlocks every door. So wherever you are, high, low, whatever season, if you can walk in humility, you see in the book of Proverbs that there's so many promises that come from it, long life, honor, riches, like influence. But humility to me, and I try to teach this to my kids, is the key that really unlocks every door. So anything on the other side of those great doors that are going to lead to celebrating moments, a great family, a great business, influence that makes a difference in the world, it's going to start with humility. And humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. That's a very good C.S. Lewis kind of moment, right? One of his favorite quotes. And so it's like, man, let me focus on other people, realize that I can learn from everybody around me. Don't make this about me, and be a servant of all. Man, a lot of things going to be worth celebrating from that kind of life.
I love it. I love it. Well, if you would like a copy of Rebel, we talked to Graham about possibly getting a signed copy.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I can get the book. I can buy the book from you and have you sign it. And
yeah.
We can send it to one of our listeners if they comment, like, subscribe, all the things, because I think it's an important message. And no matter what kind of season someone's in, this is like, I could see someone even later in their career saying, I need to time out and reset.
Yes.
So whether you're young or further along, it doesn't matter, because I think this is such an important message. So thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for
and
having
for
me,
fitting
Mindi.
this in.
Yeah.
This is just so cool that you guys off the cuff, we were like, let's go fit in an episode real quick before you guys leave town.
Yeah, we just wanted a tour of the shop, and then she's like, hey, let's do a whole episode. So
why not?
Yeah.
I mean, Graham, I could talk to you for hours. So this was so fun. Again, if you guys like this episode, comment below and share with your friends. And then we'd love to give one of our lucky listeners a free copy of Rebel from Graham Cochrane and follow him along. All right, you guys have a great evening. We'll see you next time on the Something New Show. Bye. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the show, rate, review, and share with a friend. Also, follow the Something New Show on Instagram and Facebook. If you want a fuller experience, watch the show on YouTube to help you create a life worth celebrating.